When we learned that General Lee had surrendered at Appomattox and that war was going to be ended, the weight of that war was being lifted from my husband's shoulders, and he was looking forward to serving as a peacetime president. Oh, he was so much happier and animated. He even sent me a handwritten note asking to take me on a buggy ride. Oh, a thoughtful gesture that harkened back to our courting days. Well, on that buggy ride, he did say to me that we must both be more cheerful. With the war and the passing of our darling Willie, we have been very miserable. Well, I raised my eyebrows at that blunt and yet gentle assessment because, well, as Mr. Edwards knows, it was directed at my behavior. That was the closest Mr. Lincoln ever came to reprimanding me in our 23 years of married life.
Well, I wouldn't even try to comment on that last thing, but I must admit, that buggy ride and all must have been one of the most, well, cheerful days for you in the presidency.
Well, that was April 14th, Good Friday.
Oh, that was
yes, before we went to Ford's Theater.
Well, there's no need to go into
but
that.
I want to tell these people. No, I know they would understand. No, I want to tell these people what happened that evening.
You be careful.
I will be so careful, Mr. Edwards. I'm doing just fine. Well, Mr. Lincoln had chosen a light, entertaining comedy, Our American Cousin, starring the popular Laura Keene. Well, we got there a little bit late. The play had already started. But that orchestra, they stopped those actors up there on stage by playing Hail to the Chief. Oh, and then the audience stood and gave their president thunderous applause. Oh, Mr. Lincoln's face just glowed with appreciation. And then, of course, we sat down and the play continued. And then at one point, I reached over and I clung to my husband's arm, just as if we were newlyweds. And then I whispered to him, what will the young lady with whom we were sharing the box, what will she think of my bold behavior? Well, he whispered back, she won't think anything about it. And, well, those were the last words that my husband uttered because, well, you see, a shot rang out and a bullet entered his brain, immediately obliterating that brilliant mind that had stolen my heart decades earlier. And then, well, his labored breathing, it lumbered on, driven by that bulldog determination that I had so admired ever since that first cotillion when he danced with me in the worst way. Well, his breathing continued for some 10 hours, and then it stopped, and Mr. Lincoln passed over.
Mr. Lincoln had died right then, and well, now the life of the wife of the president as a widow was beginning, and she was overtaken with grief. And yet, if that wasn't bad enough, she had the responsibility of figuring out how she's going to gather up what belonged to the family and eventually leave the White House. And of course, she had no ability at that moment to go with the body of the president to Springfield for the burial. And then you finally were able to at least go.
But I simply could not return home to Springfield. So I chose instead to take up residence in a hotel in Chicago. Now, I had very few friends left in Washington to say goodbye to me, but sadly, when my boys and I arrived in Chicago, there was nobody there to greet us.
Yeah, and what was happening was that weight of that personal debt that was hanging over, and I understand the merchants were starting to push to get paid.
Yes. Oh, and at that crucial time, Congress was unwilling to give me any kind of financial assistance. They even refused to pay for items which I had bought for the executive mansion and, of course, I had left behind.
Well, you know, I just got to tell you a sad thing. Mr. Lincoln, who I consider the most brilliant lawyer I'd ever met, and maybe everyone would have said that lawyer had not made out a will. That meant there was an indeterminate time before his estate could be all straightened out by the rather slow-moving court system.
And so then, in order to try to make ends meet, well, I had already decided I would wear black for the rest of my life. I decided I would sell all of my colorful garments in order to try to make ends meet.
Oh, the press found out what she was going to do and immediately cruelly criticized her effort to raise some needed cash. They called it the old clothes sale and then ridiculed her whole project.
Well, I should have seen that coming. Editors once again scorned me, shaping public opinion to despise me. Oh, but what hurt, almost like a knife to the heart, was the betrayal of my firstborn son, Robert.
Now let me explain. Robert had reached his majority, was beginning his law practice, and got himself engaged to be married.
And his mother's decision to, as he put it, peddle her old clothes, oh, that had greatly embarrassed my son.
Well, now, what Robert did was to caution and that she shouldn't go in selling her clothes like that. She should just be patient. Be patient and wait for the court system to finally get everything figured out, which, of course, finally they did.
Yes.
And then you had enough money, more than enough to pay off the debt.
Well, which